companies like Bharat Forge Limited and Kalyani Steels Limited, to name a few, and also chairs board meetings of BF Investment Limited and Kalyani Investment Company Limited. He has been a part of many committees of the Government of India on manufacturing, education, skill development, and bilateral relations. Mr. Kalyani has been working with Bharat Forge since 1999, starting his career with manufacturing and moving on to IT and finance. He has been the group's executive director since May 2004. Mr. Kalyani holds a BE degree in mechanical engineering from Bucknell University, Pennsylvania, USA. He is also a Harvard Business School OPM graduate and a YPO member. He is extremely passionate about manufacturing, technology, and CSR, especially in the areas of education, healthcare, and giving back to the society. We are pleased to have with us today and request you to share a few kind words.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, it's very nice to be here. I'd want to acknowledge and thank Vidya for inviting me. It's wonderful to be here. Dr. Rajni Gupte, Mr. Sandeep Ranade, Brigadier Dr. Rajiv Devekar, Dr. Praveen Kumar, and everyone present here for the SIMSARC and my dear friends. The last 3 years have been extremely tumultuous, challenging, and stressful for everyone concerned. It's broken us from our standard pattern of life and thrown us into the deep end of discovering how to manage whatever we do, whether it's running a business, delivering products to customers across the world, learning, teaching, and making sure that we bring life as close to normal for most people. Your topic is very appropriate, that we are moving from pandemic to endemic, which means that this whole instability and volatility is something that we are going to have to learn to live with. And I want to take you through what we see happening in India and around the world, and why I think that India and us Indians are best placed to be able to deal with a volatile, unstable, unpredictable world. You know, if you look at the history of India, over the last 75 years since independence, India was a subsistence economy. We went from a country that was importing food grains and dependent on the world's aid to survive, to a country that has now begun to grow and thrive. If you put some numbers together, when India got independence, our GDP was less than 1% of the world, something like 0.8%. Today, in 1991, when liberalization happened, it was 260 billion, also more or less 1% of the world. In 22, that is in 31 years, it has grown almost 12 times to about 3.2 trillion. It's believed that by 2031, the forecasts, I'm sure you've all read the Morgan Stanley report, which talks about this being India's decade. It's going to take our GDP somewhere to close to 8 trillion. So if you think about it, we increased our GDP by about 2.8 trillion in 31 years, from 1991 to 22. We are going to increase it from 3.2 to almost 8 in the next 9 years. And it's also believed that by 2047 it will be in excess of 30 trillion, which means in the next 9 years we will triple our GDP almost, and then in the next 16 years we will more than triple it again. So to put this into context, and there are a lot of people who doubt this or disbelieve this, but let me give you a little lesson in history. For 2500 years, from 1000 BC to about 15, 16, 1700 AD, India's share of GDP of the world's economy was anywhere between 22 to 27%. In 1700, India's GDP was 27% of the world. We were the center of the world as far as trading and commerce was concerned. China was less than us. It was about 22%. At the same time, Europe was 23%. All of Europe, Spain, Portugal, Belgium, these were all colonial powers. All of these were put together less than India. Britain was less than 2%. And then when the British left India, we were 1%. What happened? Basically, in many ways, we lost focus and lost touch with our culture, our values, and our ethos and our philosophy. And we became mentally second-class citizens. And this subjugation of India is something which I think only your generation, and maybe to some extent my generation, has not had to live with. Anybody who is born after 1991 does not have the experience of what it was to run a business in a controlled economy. I talk to my father very often, and he tells me that when I wanted to set up a new plant, I had to go to Delhi, convince some secretary there that I want to make this part, therefore I need to import this equipment. And it would take 2 to 3 years to convince them. By that time, that equipment and process has already become obsolete. So please imagine, from a time where we were dependent on other people to decide our fate, you are today in a position where you can make your dreams come true. India is a startup economy. India is the fastest growing major economy of the world. And India is going to be the powerhouse of economic growth for the world for the next 20 to 25 years. You are very lucky that you are born in this generation. And you're even more lucky to be a part of such a fine institution like Symbiosis, where you're given the exposure, the peer support and drive, and the kind of educational challenges, including the ability to do research, to do publish papers, etc., which I think honestly prepare you for what is to come. Let me give you a perspective of what we believe is going to unfold in India and how all of you are going to be part of the golden age of India. If you look at the way COVID and the post-COVID effect of, post-COVID environment globally is, China is still reeling from COVID. Many parts of China have full closure. Their economy is at its lowest levels in the last 40 years. Europe is hit by massive energy crises, and you'd be surprised that the price of energy in Europe today is 15 times the price of energy in India. What this means is there are many factors that are going to provide a tailwind to India. One is demographics, which are both happening in China and in Europe. We run plants in Europe, we run plants in the US, we run plants in India. There is no comparison as to the availability of skills and the availability of talent in any of these geographies. It is very difficult to find talented people willing to work in a manufacturing industry anywhere outside India. In India also it's becoming expensive, but we believe that as we increase the size of the funnel, which means we skill more people, there will be an unlimited supply available in India. And we also believe that if you look at the kind of environment that India and Indian businessmen have had to run businesses in, poor to limited infrastructure, power failures, no proper roads, no proper ports, vastly inferior infrastructure, worse bureaucracy, taxation structures that are not efficient. In spite of that, we have made many sectors of Indian manufacturing and Indian industry global leaders. Okay, let's leave the IT sector apart because that doesn't rely on physical infrastructure. But if you look at pharma, you look at engineering goods, and you look at textiles and jewelry and many other such sectors, India has become a global leader because of what the companies did internally, how they built their capability, how they used the human resources to develop high-end engineering capability at a competitive cost. How we realized that we are not able to produce at the scale that China can, but we can produce the high variety, large differentiation, which they can't. So we found and occupied a niche. But now I think it's time for India to step into the sun and to actually be a mainstream player. If you look at most global companies today, all of them have a China plus one strategy. And what is the China plus one strategy? In a very simple way, is China for China and look at another one or two locations where they can manufacture for the world. Now, it is up to us to take hold of this opportunity and implement it into a reality. Most companies from the US, Europe are very comfortable working with Indians and Indian companies because A, we all speak English, we have rule of law which they understand, and our judicial processes are fairly transparent, if not so time bound. So we see huge opportunities. Talking about how Indian companies have proven themselves. If you look at the pandemic, everybody thought that when this whole COVID hit, that India will probably be one of the worst affected because we have, our GDP levels per capita are very low. Our public institutions of healthcare and our means of administering and delivering this are quite poor. But the government seized upon the fact that we can have a industry-government partnership where private industry can support government in implementation through management support. And not only that, but many companies, ours included, were tasked to produce products that we had never produced. We tied up with the Jet Propulsion Lab in the United States, where they licensed us technology for their vital breathing apparatus, oxygen breathing apparatus. We also tied up with Stanford University for making this. We manufactured oxygen cylinders, oxygen plants. Now all of this proves that there is technology, there is capability, only if it is harnessed and made to work through a process that delivers results. What did the pandemic teach us? As a person who runs a business, it taught us that Indians are very adaptable and Indian companies are very adaptable. We went from running our businesses in a physical domain to very quickly running the management side of it online, whether it was through Zoom, Teams, largely Teams. But we very quickly adapted, and what we found is that after the pandemic was over, we have improved the efficiency of the white-collar manpower in our company by 40%. Because today in a Teams meeting, you only have those people who are actually going to contribute. It very clearly exposes who's contributing, who's not contributing. So you only have those people, and then other people can do other things. In a similar way, the skills that we learned of working in a digital environment, working faster, working in a collaborative manner have now helped us reduce costs and improve throughput and customer service. what do we see as the biggest challenges today for India and Indian companies? Quite clearly, the global crises are what's happening in Europe between Ukraine and Russia are a large part of what keeps us all awake. Obviously, our neighbor to the northeast also is another challenge. And they have strategically taken steps over the last 20 to 25 years to position themselves very strongly in future economies or in future industries, whether it is capturing large control over precious and future important minerals, creating technologies, creating scale in those areas. Those are some of the things that we cannot rely on our government to do. Because our government is a democracy, they have to look after the bottom of the pyramid, they can't be supporting only the industry. So that is where industry in India has to take a role and play the role of putting the steps in place to enable our future. And the second thing that what we have learned is that there are fantastic R&D institutions which are run by quasi-governmental institutions, whether it is NCL, whether it is in the DRDO, whether they are in other institutions like Indian Institute of Science, etc., which have been doing very good research, but Indian companies have not been able to access them because somehow these R&D institutions have been very insular. So in the future, definitely the share of R&D, which is 0.8% what companies spend today, is going to go to 2%. And this 2% will be a combination of what companies spend and what they will do along with other academic and research institutions. So my message is that whatever we do for the future, we have to define an Indian way of doing it. We can't copy what China did or what the US did or what Europe did, because their environment, their organizational makeup, their societal structure is very different. Largely, if you look at Europe, they're very small countries. The biggest country in Europe is Germany with 80 million people, whereas one state in India is more than that. So we have to find solutions that work for us. We have to build Indian technology and Indian companies powered by Indian technology which take advantage of the resources and capabilities that exist in our country. But there are some things that we have to do differently. If you look at the whole EV sector, for example, this is going to redefine manufacturing in India. We think of one of the hardcore manufacturing sectors being automotive. Today, an automobile has about 3,500 to 4,000 parts. So you have that many people who make the parts that go into a vehicle. If you take an electric vehicle, it has not more than 200 parts. Okay? So you're making the product so much simpler, and at the same time, something which contributes for 30% of that product is not made in the country, which is lithium-ion batteries. Yes, there is a PLI scheme which is enabling that. It will happen over the next 5 to 10 years. But it is going to reduce the opportunity for many companies that don't have high-tech capability or investment capability. So what do you do about that? What do you do about SMEs? Does that mean that they go out of business and people lose jobs? How do we reorient our structure of our economy so that companies can get tierized and become sub-suppliers and do work of a speciality that leads to a value chain that creates compound value for everyone? I'm sure you, as MBA students, have heard that China has these cities where they produce goods. The whole city produces one or two products. There's a city that makes furniture, so they make right from the timber to the cloth to everything in one location, so that there is no logistics cost, there is no working capital that is abused or stuck up in the whole system. So therefore, they're able to be 30, 40, 50% cheaper than anywhere else in the world. So how do we look at creating synergies between companies, suppliers, customers to take advantage? And you can do this digitally, you can do it through collaboration, and you can do it through partnerships. So I think this is going to be another element of our future where we are going to have to be very open-minded about how we work with I would say not just, it's going to be some kind of a co-opetition. You'll work with partners and competitors in order to leverage scale and size. And the key that this has to deliver is capital efficiency. Because we are not an economy where we get unlimited money from, from our government or anyone like that. But we have to use our capital very efficiently. And one of the big enablers to improve our capital efficiency right now is infrastructure. This is the one area where I think India has got the act right. If you go to YouTube, there are lots of videos that show India is building at a furious pace. I think there's some topic like that. And it shows roads, tunnels, railways, water treatment plants, and all kinds of infrastructure being built at an amazing pace. And in 5 years, this will have a dramatic impact on the cost of doing business. Additionally, one very important factor that is going to aid us, and that is probably God's grace, is renewable energy. All over the world, everybody wants to make industries greener and more sustainable. Anywhere else in the world, if you go to Europe and you want to buy renewable energy or green energy, you end up paying 2 to 3 times of what you pay for conventional energy. India is probably the only country in the world where you can buy renewable energy at half the price of conventional energy. And this is going to be one of the big enablers for us to export. Because if there are quotas, and if Europe especially wants to buy green products, we are one of the few economies that is going to be able to supply products using green energy and green sources. So these are the kind of factors that are going to enable India and Indian manufacturing. If you couple high level of infrastructure growth and infrastructure development, tailwinds of industries moving out of Europe, out of China, large number of people available who can be skilled, energy at a competitive rate, capital available from global investors, young people, ambitious, well-educated, and a digital stack that can make any industry more competitive. It all creates the perfect recipe for us to start growing at a pace that can once again take India, if not to 25%, but at least to somewhere in the region of 5, 6, 7% of global GDP. And as Morgan Stanley predicts, that India will be responsible for more than 20% of the incremental GDP growth of the world from 2030 to 2040. So I think my message to you is, we've had difficult times. We've seen a lot of volatility. We've had a lot of pain. We've adapted to it, and the best is yet to come. There are a lot of good things happening in the background. The government is doing a lot of things. Academic institutions like yours are preparing you for what's to come. I think you have an amazing opportunity. And if you couple this with some of the big policies like Atmanirbhar Bharat, Make in India, the PLI schemes, these are all opportunities. Startup India, all these are huge opportunities for India to grow its industrial sector, services sector in every way. Whether it is banking, whether it is insurance, whether it is finance, whether it is medical. If you look at Ayushman Bharat, just the simple Ayushman Bharat scheme, it provides medical insurance to almost 600 million people. People who had no access to proper medical facilities and infrastructure because they couldn't pay for it are now covered up to 1 lakh rupees by this scheme. Imagine what that opens up as an opportunity for people. Improving the quality of life of people, and once you improve the quality of life of people, then it improves the consumption and spending patterns. So, every pace you put your finger, you will find opportunity. I think we have to be optimistic, we have to be patient, and we have to be constructive. There are a lot of times when all of us get despondent and, fed up and irritable and whatever, but it doesn't help. It happens to all of us. I think we have to sometimes look at the other side and see how much better off we are than many other places, and how we can go from here and contribute to making India a stronger and a better economy, and take its rightful place in the world. Again, it's up to you and your generation, and the generations that have come in the last 10 to 15 years before you, who are going to make this happen. And lastly, this is my firm belief, that the greatest opportunity lies for you in India and not outside India. This is the place where people are going to come back to build the future of their industries. So I think you're in the right place at the right time with the right tools, and I wish you really all the best in making all of our dreams come true, and make India at 100 really what it needs to be. Thank you very much. I hope so as I mentioned to Vidya, that I would love to learn from you. I would love to have the opportunity to hear your thoughts and questions, and maybe ask some questions to you as well. So I think we'll have a Q&A session now.